Hello, my name is Arnar Thór Jonsson. I am sitting here in Iceland with Professor Mattias Desmet. He is honoring us with his presence here due to a conference that will be held in Reykjavík this evening. Mattias and I have spent some time together here and had some good conversations, and I wanted to follow up on that, Mattias, with what we have been discussing. And just to start off, you wrote this book on the psychology of totalitarianism, and I would sort of maybe suggest that you start telling our viewers a little bit about that book and the idea behind it.
Yes. Like about 7 years ago, I started to think about what totalitarianism really is. Like, most people are familiar with the term totalitarian state, and they immediately associate that term with Soviet Union, Nazi Germany, which were indeed the first totalitarian states in history. And but most people, in one way or another, cannot distinguish between a classical dictatorship and a totalitarian state. And that was what fascinated me. There is a difference. Mm-hmm. A classical dictatorship is something completely different than a totalitarian state. And as soon as you understand the difference, you can also see why there were no totalitarian states before the 20th century. Mm-hmm. And for me, in my book, that were the two questions I started from. Like, what is the difference between a totalitarian state and a classical dictatorship, and why did totalitarianism emerge for the first time in the 20th century? Mm-hmm. And I always felt that it was extremely important to answer these questions now, because I think that what we are going through now as a society, it's clear to everyone that we go through a series of crises. We have the banking crisis, we have the terrorism crisis in the beginning of the 21st century, we have the Me Too crisis, we have the climate crisis, we had the Corona crisis, we have the Ukraine crisis, we have the Russia crisis now. So we go through a series of crises at different levels. But I think that hidden beyond the surface of these crises, we find one big overarching crisis, which is a crisis of sincerity and truth in our society, which is connected at the same time to the emergence of a new kind of totalitarianism. A new kind of totalitarianism, which is not a fascist totalitarianism, as in Nazi Germany, or which is not an old school communist totalitarianism, as in the Soviet Union, which is a technocratic, transhumanist totalitarianism. And that's why I really believe that what we are facing is a dramatic loss of democratic rights and freedoms, which happens to a large extent in an unintentional way. There are all kinds of processes that makes that national governments lose their power, and that the globalist institutions have much more grip, have more and more grip on our society. As I said, this happens to a large extent in an unintentional way due to certain psychological processes that are going on in our society. But I really believe that it is just quintessential and crucial to understand what is going on and to understand the true nature of totalitarianism. In particular, and you can start to understand it as soon as you understand why it is different from a classical dictatorship. In a classical dictatorship, there is like a small group of people, a dictatorial regime, who is experienced as having a huge aggressive potential, which makes the population so scared of them that the population accepts that this small group of people unilaterally imposes its social contract to the population. That's in a nutshell and a little bit simplistic what a classical dictatorship is and how a classical dictatorship emerges. It emerges through terror.
Yes.
It terrorizes the population until it is so scared that the population just accepts what it wants, that it accepts that it imposes a social contract to society. In a totalitarian state, emerges according to a completely different process. In a totalitarian, and when the basis and the origin of a totalitarian state is in a very specific type of group formation in a society. A group formation in which a certain ideology, a certain conviction, a certain set of ideas, a certain narrative has so much impact on a part of the population, usually about 20 to 30%, that this part of the population becomes so fanatically convinced that sticking to this ideology is the only solution to the problems of society. Becomes so fanatically convinced of that narrative, of this ideology, that they do not have a capacity anymore to take a critical distance of the narrative, even when it goes utterly absurd. That they are willing to radically self-sacrifice for the narrative, and that they become radically intolerant for everyone who thinks differently. And we call this type of group, I call this type of group formation a mass formation. A mass formation, mass formation has existed as long as mankind existed, like the Crusades were examples of mass formation, the witch hunts were examples of mass formation. In the French Revolution there was a mass formation, and also in Nazi Germany and in the Soviet Union there were huge mass formations where, for instance, in Nazi Germany, people started to believe so fanatically in certain race theories or certain historical materialist theories in the Soviet Union. They started to believe so fanatically in these theories that they were convinced that they had to eliminate each and every one that didn't buy into this ideology. And that's what happens time and time again. And when a new totalitarian state emerges, a part of the population becomes fanatically convinced that they have to follow a certain ideology. And now we see certain similarities. There are certain crises, like the climate crisis, like the Me Too crisis, like during the Corona crisis we had this as well to a certain extent. We see certain crises in which people start to be convinced that only a certain ideology, a certain narrative can bring the solution to the problem. And this narrative focuses their attention so much on one aspect of reality, for instance the climate problems, that they don't see that the solutions proposed in the narrative will be dramatic at several other levels. That's typical for a mass formation. It focuses the attention just like hypnosis. It's a process. Gustave Le Bon and all the major scholars investigating this process of mass formation have observed and described that it is identical to hypnosis. The narrative focuses the attention on one small aspect of reality, and that makes people completely blind for the rest of reality. And the people who are not in the grip of the mass formation, of the hypnosis, and every one of us is in the grip of one or another narrative. It doesn't mean some people are in the grip of this narrative, other people in the grip of that narrative. But still, the people who are not in the grip of that particular mass formation see what's happening. They try to wake up and show the people, like, look, watch out, okay, that's dangerous, but there are other dangers as well. And usually they don't succeed. So that's how a totalitarian state emerges.
So, Mattias, what you are basically describing is a society where people are being controlled, perhaps, or they're being led by now the media. And this is also the reality that we are facing in the 21st century, that previous societies were not faced with in the same way. So that there's a loss of perception, a loss of proportionality, a loss of overview. And we are living also in a fragmented society. I suppose we are more lonely than we were ever before. There is a sense of depression, and I think in this country we have some sort of a record of taking antidepressants. So is that a part of the problem also?
Yes, definitely. Because, like, as I said, like, these mass formations have always existed in history. In medieval times there were mass formations, but what's very striking is that throughout the last 2 centuries the mass formations became stronger and stronger and stronger, and that had 2 reasons. And the one you just mentioned, you mentioned them both actually. One reason for the mass formations to become stronger and to last longer was the fact that very often they were fed by media narratives. So if a certain group of people starts to be in the grip of a certain ideology or a narrative, then usually after a few weeks the narrative will lose its power, unless it is recirculated and disseminated time and time again through the mass media. In that case, the mass formation will continue to exist for a long time, sometimes for 20, 30, 40 years, and that's when it can become the basis of a new state system. And that's when a totalitarian state emerges. So on the one hand, indeed, the reason why the mass formations, the mass hypnosis lasted longer was the emergence of mass media at the end of the 19th century. But the second, and very important, but usually neglected reason, was the fact that throughout the last 200 of years, more and more people started to feel lonely indeed. More and more people started to get disconnected from nature and from the people around them. And these 2 things, that happened, I described it in my book, The Psychology of Totalitarianism, in the first 5 chapters, how this process of social isolation and loneliness emerged in our society. And the strange thing is that the lonely and disconnected state is the state where a subject, where a human being is most vulnerable to propaganda. So these 2 factors, the emergence of modern propaganda throughout the last 2 centuries and the emergence of loneliness and disconnectedness throughout the last few centuries, they reinforce each other. They work together. And together they form the backbone of the totalitarian state. A lonely mass in the grip of propaganda is the backbone, the essence of a totalitarian state. We've seen it in Nazi Germany, we've seen it in the Soviet Union, and we see it now again. Okay. We see how the mass media, more and more, without any feeling for nuance, distribute certain narratives, like the climate narrative, or the corona narrative, or the Me Too narrative, or doesn't matter what. They distribute these narratives, and I don't intend to say that these narratives are entirely wrong. That's not what they intend to say. What they intend to say is this, that the mass media and a certain group of people become so fanatically convinced of these narratives that they do not tolerate dissident or alternative voices to speak out anymore, and that's an extremely dangerous situation. That's exactly what leads to totalitarianism. And indeed, essentially, this is due to the fact that a major part of the population is facing severe loneliness, a disconnectedness, and as a consequence of that, lack of meaning and purpose in life. Up to 60% of the people worldwide report that they consider their own job to be a so-called bullshit job, a job without purpose and meaning. And in the ultimate stage, this disconnectedness and loneliness leads to very specific effects at the level of emotional and affective life. In the end stage, people who feel lonely and disconnected will typically be confronted with so-called free-floating anxiety, frustration, and aggression. That means a kind of anxiety, frustration, and aggression, which people cannot attribute to a certain cause. People feel anxious, frustrated, and aggressive, without knowing what they feel anxious, frustrated, and aggressive for. And it's an extremely aversive mental state. As you said that here in Iceland, the consumption of antidepressants is huge. In Belgium it is as well, for instance, where I come from. But that's typically, in the end, that's a symptom of a lonely state where people feel no purpose anymore in life. And it is this end stage, this affective state in which people feel anxious but don't know what they feel anxious for, feel depressed but don't know what they feel depressed for, feel frustrated and aggressive without knowing what they feel frustrated for. But it's this state that makes people so extremely vulnerable for propaganda. If in this condition you disseminate a narrative through the mass media indicating an object of anxiety, then all this free-floating anxiety might connect to the object of anxiety, a virus, climate change, a Me Too narrative, and so on. You have so many opportunities. All the anxiety might connect to this object of anxiety, and people's attention is absorbed so much by this one object of anxiety that they don't see anymore, that it is disproportionate. That's how propaganda has this strange hypnotizing effect on a population. So I think that's the fundamental analysis we have to make. Where does this propaganda come from?
Yep.
Why do we live in a society where propaganda is so omnipotent, and why did people start to feel lonely and disconnected throughout the last 2 centuries?
Yes. What part of the answer to that question might be that in previous centuries, shall we say up until the late Middle Ages, people were a part of a family. They were a part of a nation or a region or a tribe or a religious group or whatever. So they were a cog in a big machine in that sense, but they did have a purpose as an important part of it, I would think. So that gave you a sense of belonging, I would think. Then we reached a stage where the individual was invented, you could say. I would tell you about a book called Inventing the Individual by Larry Siedentop that everyone should read on this subject. So that the individual comes into the story. And we have all kinds of human flourishing leading up from that. We have inventions, we have freedom of speech, we have liberal societies and democratic societies, right? But then perhaps the powers that be feel that this is hard to control and that people must in some way be controlled. So we're again in a struggle somehow between this sense of our sense of wanting to be free and our sense of wanting to belong to something bigger than ourselves, right? This is I suppose a very human feeling.
Of course, the human being flourishes when it finds the right balance between individualism and collectivism.
Right. So, but what you are saying, Mattias, is that now a society that has leaned too far in the direction of authoritarianism is, of course, not a society where the people are flourishing in any way, right? They cannot flourish really in such a society.
No, absolutely not. I think you need this healthy balance between individualism and collectivism for a human being to flourish. Yeah. And that's exactly what got lost. The strange thing is that the emergence of the rationalist view on man and the world, somewhere in let's say the beginning of the 16th century, the emergence of this rationalist view on man and the world promised the individual that it would become completely free. Yeah. Like there had been religious narratives and mythical narratives that enslaved the population, that subjected it to priests and to God, and the rationalist view on man and the world promised like no.
Okay, so
there is no God and there is no religion to tell you what to do anymore. You are a rational being, you can think for yourself. Your rational knowledge will allow you to eliminate all disease and suffering in the human condition, and in the end you will become completely free. So the rationalism led initially to an extreme individualism.
Yes.
But the strange thing is that after a while it started to be the other way around. That's a strange thing. That after a while, first at the societal level, we could see that like in the totalitarian systems of the 20th century, that this extreme individualism certainly lapsed into extreme collectivism.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and of course, somewhere it's logical.
Yeah.
Extreme individualism is always disconnectedness. As you said, if you belong to a family, okay, you are connected, but you also have certain responsibilities. You are not completely free. You have certain responsibilities you have to live up to in the family, and you cannot feel completely free, but you are connected to other people at least. And if that drops away, someone initially feels more free, but he also feels disconnected, and in the end, strangely enough, captivated in his own individual existence. And that's where he starts to develop a very strong longing to belong again.
Yes.
But rather than doing it in a moderate way, typically extreme individualism tends to lapse into extreme collectivism, as it was experienced in the totalitarian states. In a totalitarian state, you had no individual rights at all. You had to do everything. You had to sacrifice all your individual interests for the interests of the collective, of the state. That's so typical. And that's the psychological process that I describe in detail in my book. Like, how does this happen?
Right. So you go, let's say, an individual that goes into the state of feeling free, and then he realizes that he is lonely and he feels disconnected from other people, and in the end he is feeling, I would suppose, quite scared even, and he seeks something bigger than himself, and what happens is that he is then maybe perhaps herded into a group, or he is subjected to some sort of a shall we say, ideology, so that leads to corporatism and factionalism and strife. So that's quite a negative cycle that we're in. But we have to perhaps look a little bit deeper. What could be the response or the path forward to an individual that is feeling lonely, disconnected? What can if he looks within, instead of looking out, instead of looking for help from others or from a faction or from grand leaders with all sorts of solutions, which we would probably call fake solutions, if he looks within himself rather than seek answers on the outside, what would he find?
That's a good question.
Is there hope? That's basically the question. Yes.
Of course there is. Like in my previous book, I have been describing the problem. I've presented an analysis of the problem of our culture and society. And in the next one, I'm focusing on the solution. And I'm sure there is a solution, and the solution lies in a reappreciation of one of the most fundamental acts a human being can engage in. Is the act of sincere speech. You can see it from every psychological perspective you take. It's the act of sincere speech, a reappreciation of what truth is, that is the remedy for a society which is sick of this new kind of lie which we call propaganda. That's the solution. Clearly, from a psychological point of view, you can clearly see it, but you need a good analysis of the problem to really understand that. Like, in my opinion, and in my analysis, the root cause of the problems we are facing now, the root cause of this new kind of totalitarianism we are dealing with now, the root cause has to be situated at the level of our rationalist view on man and the world. It was our rationalist view on man, the rationalist view on man and the world. I mean, this view on man and the world that emerged in the 16th century, 17th, 18th, 19th century, which considers the universe as a kind of a set of elementary particles, atoms and molecules, which all interact with each other according to the laws of mechanics and which can all be understood in a rational way. So the universe in this conception is like a huge machine which can be perfectly rationally understood, and the human being is like a small machine, a cog in the large machine. And also the human being is like a biochemical materialist process that can perfectly be understood in a rationalist way, and consequently rational understanding within this conception should be the guiding principle of individual human existence and of human living together in general. So that's like how we started to consider life since the tradition of enlightenment emerged. We believe that the human rational mind should be the guiding principle, is capable of grasping the essence of life. Through rational understanding, we can understand, control, and manipulate everything, and rational understanding should be the organizing principle of our society. Well, that's the fundamental mistake.
Okay, so this is a mechanistic view of the world and a mechanistic view of the human being.
Yeah.
So I was an associate professor at a law school here in Reykjavik. I sometimes was trying to explain this to my students, that the law and politics should not be a social engineering process. We have to guard the democratic political processes. Shall we say, one example, we know that Venus is going around the sun. We can say with we can predict exactly where it will be 2 years from now, right? But the question to the general public can also be set forward in the following way. We cannot predict, even though we can examine your life, Mattias, until now, no one could predict exactly where you will be 2 years from now, because that is a question of what you yourself decide with your free will, right? So that's an entirely different perspective. We have free will. We make independent decisions, hopefully, and we have intuition, etc. And we are truth-seeking beings, not mechanical machines.
Exactly.
So these are two completely different views of the world and of our position within the world, right?
You know, the strange thing is that actually science itself showed us in a masterly way that the essence of life is not rational and can never be rationally predicted. There is like, of course, we had the famous physicists of the first half of the 20th century, such as Max Planck and Heisenberg and Niels Bohr and stuff, who all said the universe is not a machine. We started to study it as a machine, but the longer we study it, the more we see that it looks more like a process of consciousness than like a mechanical entity. So, and then later on, we had the complex dynamical systems theory, which concluded exactly this. Like each complex dynamical system in nature, which are most phenomena in nature, does behave like an irrational number in mathematics, literally like an irrational number, meaning that there is no pattern in it,
right,
and that it is fundamentally unpredictable. They had this nice philosophical concept of deterministic unpredictability. Complex dynamical phenomena in nature can be described mathematically, but even with their formula in your hand, you cannot predict their behavior for 1 second. So that shows us, science itself showed us that life is not predictable, the human being is not predictable, nothing is predictable actually. Some things have a certain pragmatic predictability, such as the orbiting of Venus around the Sun, but in the end there is always complexity in it, and in the end in life, and in the end, there is a fundamental unpredictability of things. So that's something extremely important. Science itself shows us, no, there's a limit to rational understanding, and the essence of life, really, the core of life, the essence, always transcends rational understanding. And that's why people like Niels Bohr said, poetry is much more fundamental than science, than rational understanding. And that's why Niels Bohr and Heisenberg used religious and mystical narratives to convey something about this completely irrational world, for instance, of the behavior of subatomic particles. Niels Bohr said, with rationality, you can do nothing to understand the behavior of atoms. He said, when it comes to atoms, language can only be used as poetry. Literally, he said, there is no way this quantum world, for instance, is so intrinsically and fundamentally absurd that every rational theory doesn't connect to it. You need something like poetry, or he also used certain texts from the Upanishads and India to grasp something of this world. So that's a fundamental metaphysical revolution we are going through now.
Okay.
We are about to find out, as a culture, that rationality is not the guiding principle of life. It cannot be. That we need something else. And that something else, it's very clear what it is. It is ethical principles. Ethical principles. The only thing that can really organize human living together is not rational understanding. We have to be rational, but we have to find that limit where we have to move to a different kind of knowledge, a resonating knowledge, an empathic feeling knowledge, in order to have the chance to survive as a humanity.
Okay. So, just to try to sum this up, we are faced with governments or a state that is trying to tell us that everything should be rational, everything can be planned and predicted. This is a mechanistic view of the world. And if we choose to be subjected to that, we are going against not only the nature of ourselves, our deepest nature, but as truth-seeking beings that are guided by ethical principles, but we would also be going against basically the nature of the universe, which is not, as you were saying, is not a mechanistic world entity at the end of the day, and is not completely rational either, right?
Yes.
So if we are to find, shall we say, some sort of inner peace, if we are to live in harmony with of the outside world, then we have to, I suppose, set a different tone than the mechanistic, predictable, totalitarian, authoritarian, dictatorial tone that we have been discussing in the first part of the interview. So we would need another tone. And what is the description that you use? It's a metaphysical, you said?
A metaphysical revolution, yes.
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 How would you describe that so that people understand and can relate to it?
Every culture is based on a certain view on life,
Yes.
on the universe, on our existence as a human being. And for instance, somewhere in the 18th century, 17th century, there was a metaphysical revolution. Before that, the world was a creation of God. So
a cosmos. It was a cosmos, and not a chaos.
Yes, indeed.
Yes.
Yeah. And after that, and maybe the French Revolution is the most pivotal point in that, the religious view on man in the world was replaced by the materialist view on man in the world.
Mhm.
The universe was no longer considered to be a book written by God or the creation of God. No, the universe was just a mechanistic phenomenon that started with the Big Bang and in which a complex mechanical process started that ultimately, through a series of mechanical steps, led to an evolutionary process in which the human being came into being. And so that's our current view on man in the world. And within this current view on man in the world,
Mhm.
we live in a mechanistic universe, a machine-like universe, a machine that can be understood in a rational way, in which everything can be rationally manipulated, controlled, and so on and so on. And as soon as you start from this view on man in the world, the ultimate logical consequence at the level of society is technocracy. Of course. If truly this entire existence, this entire universe is a machine, and if the human being is indeed like a small robot or a cyborg, a small machine in the big machine, then why would you ask a democratically elected politician to be in charge of the machine? No, what you need is an engineer, a technical expert, to control the machine, to reparate it when it's necessary, and so on and so on.
Yes.
And that's what we are doing, what we are seeing now.
Yes.
The global institutions, such as the UN, the WHO, the WEF, and so on, they explicitly say, I was talking with Asim Malhotra this morning exactly about that, they explicitly say that we need to get rid of democracy. What we need is a technical analysis, for instance, of climate change, and then a technical solution to the problem, not limited by all kinds of democratic processes of people who might be too stupid in their eyes, in their opinion, to know what we have to do. So that's as soon as you start from a rationalist, mechanist view of man in the world, the logical consequence is that the society has to be organized like a technocracy. That's a logical consequence. And that leads to, among other things, to the loss of truth speech. Because within this view of man in the world, the human being, the highest a human being can do is survive. Human beings have to struggle to survive. They have to be smart enough to survive. So, a human being that for whom the highest aim in life is to survive.
Within the system.
Within the system?
Yes.
Yes, but evolutionary speaking, human beings just want to survive. That's all they want to do. And that's the highest they can achieve is being the fittest in the struggle to survive. And
so is there then there is no room for personal creativity, personal freedom, no room for criticism against the authorities?
And for truth.
And for truth.
Of course not. Because speaking the truth, the ancient Greeks knew that already, is always riskful. It's always riskful. It puts you at risk.
Yes.
Truth speech is exactly this kind of speech that penetrates through the veil of appearances, that reveals something that people don't want to hear. So, the one who speaks the truth usually is hated. It's dangerous to speak the truth. So, within this rationalist view of man in the world, people started to use language in an instrumental way. And the leaders of society started to use language in an instrumental way. Not to reveal the truth, but to manipulate people. And that's why, and people, nobody seems to see this. But modern propaganda was born at the same time as the rationalist view of man in the world got dominant after the French Revolution. In France, the first institute of propaganda was called the Bureau d'Opinion Publique. And after that, propaganda became ever more important. And propaganda is exactly this. Forget about truth. No. Say exactly these things that makes people do what you want them to do.
Yes.
And manipulate them.
Yes.
And so that's one consequence. And the metaphysical revolution we have to go through, I think, is really this. We have to change from a society led by a mass of people in the grip of propaganda to a society led by a group of people united by sincere speech. That is the metaphysical revolution we are going through. Now we see that propaganda is very powerful, that there is a large group of people who blindly follows it, and we see slowly the emergence of a new awareness of people who feel that without sincerity and truth, there will be no humanity left in this world. And I sense and I feel how many people start to become aware of the fundamental importance of truth for a human being. And they try to find what it means for a human being, to speak in a sincere way and to be truthful. And my next book is all about that, the psychology of truth. Truth speech is exactly this kind of speech, which emerges from within. Mm-hmm. It is this kind of speech which starts from something you feel inside of yourself, which you usually hide behind your outer ideal images, which makes you vulnerable. But when you have the courage to articulate it and to show that what is usually hidden behind your outer ideal image and your ego, when you have the courage to articulate it, to express it, and to give it to someone else, you will find out that it is exactly this what makes you feel connected to someone, and what makes you feel you, what makes you feel real. So it is this act of truth speech which is the real remedy for the disease of totalitarianism and propaganda. That is now the most fundamental problem of our society, I think.
So that the way, we are not proposing, I would say, Mattias, any magic solutions, but it is certainly would be extremely helpful, according to what you're saying, in this era of disconnectedness, loneliness, and fear, that we could connect with other people through truth speech by speaking the truth as we feel it is, right?
Yeah.
That is the best way to connect to other people, right?
Exactly. And politicians have to lead by example.
Yes.
And now they do the opposite.
They do the opposite and
Yes.
lead by what?
Lead by example. They have to show what sincerity is. And now we see exactly the opposite, like political culture now, and I don't blame one particular politician. It's political culture in general that is perverted in this respect. Politicians use language in a purely rhetorical way. They try to convince people of things they don't believe in themselves. And that's a disaster, because they are the leaders of society, the public leaders. So what we need is a new type of politician, a politician who refrains from rhetorical speech or propagandized speech, and who has the courage again to speak in a sincere way, who tells the people, okay, should I be elected? I won't make it very easy for you at certain points. I will propose things that are not easy for the population.
Yes.
We'll go through difficult times, or we have to face this. This is a problem we want to ignore, but we cannot ignore it. Should I be elected? I will tackle it. So stuff like that. We need politicians who speak out of their gut feeling, not because they are convinced that they are the only ones, who know the truth or something. No, but just because they say, like, look, this is how I feel it now, and this is how I will speak. That's truth speech. If you read Aristotle, he considered sincerity and courage at the level of speech to be the core virtue of the politician. And that's what we lost in our world. At the level of the leaders and the level of the population. And that's what we have to reinvent. We have to reinvent the crucial importance, or to reinvent what it means for a human being to speak the truth and to be sincere. And that is the true revolution we are going through, I think.
Very good. Mattias, I will do my very best, I promise you that, for the next couple of months, while I'm seeking to become the president of Iceland. I promise you, I will speak the truth to the best of my ability.
Yeah. It's wonderful.
and try to lead some sort of an improvement in our politics and in our outlook, because that is what we definitely need now. We have come onto some sort of a breach. We cannot go any much further before, you know, we have a disaster. So we have to steer away from that, and the best way to do that is by speaking the truth. Is that the conclusion then?
Exactly, I think so. I think so, yes. That's what I intended to say at least, and I'm very grateful, really, that there are people like you who have the courage to try to be a different type of politician.
Yes.
I hope you succeed here in Iceland. It is a wonderful country. It's such a magical country.
Yes.
Yeah. It's so beautiful. It's like
Yeah.
there is a natural mystic here.
Indeed, indeed it is, and we have to feel it, and I think many of our guests feel it as well. But Mattias, right now at the end, I would like you, if you can share with us, how can we give people the courage to do this? How can we, because we need teammates. How can we help them, you know, find the courage within to speak this truth that they do feel?
Well,
and I suppose everyone feels in certain moments in their lives.
You know, we have to do it ourselves in the first place, and then you see that's one of the things I explain in my next book, like that. As soon as someone starts to speak out in a courageous way,
yes,
in a vulnerable way, because truth speech is always vulnerable speech. It's always emanates, starts, emerges from your most vulnerable feeling inside. If someone has the courage to speak in this way, if someone opens up and gives some of these vulnerable, sincere words, very often it starts to resonate in someone else. Literally, as if someone opens up the shell of his ego and allows something to be heard of the strings that vibrate inside of his body.
yes,
They enter the body of the other, touch the strings of the soul and the body of the other, and
yes,
the other starts to resonate with it, and
yes,
he starts to feel the desire very often to speak himself in a truthful way. And you know, we cannot control that, because trying to control, trying to predict what will happen is so much old school. We just have to do it, it is justified, I think, to hope and to faith that this resonating truth speech will soon become more powerful than the sound of propaganda.
right.
We just have to believe that it will happen, I think.
It is
and
easy.
do it and practice it.
I think it is easy to believe it, because not only is it more positive, it is also perhaps the core of the world as you were describing it.
Of
If
course.
the core is not materialistic
No.
and dead and mechanistic, it is full of energy and life. And so when you speak in this fashion, and we speak in this fashion, we are speaking from our deepest source, which is the energy on a frequency then that resonates with everyone else.
Yeah.
And everyone feels it, whether or not they show it or not.
Yeah.
So we can have faith that we can do it, and we want to live in harmony with other people, harmony with the world. And that is probably then the best way to do it. And Mattias, I am so grateful for your time here, for your wisdom and your courage to speak the way you do. I hope you continue. I wish you all the best in your future endeavors. And I hope sincerely that you will manage to reach the ears and the hearts of millions and billions of people. So please continue your fantastic work.
I will. Thank you for having me on.
Pleasure. Honor.